ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Well, if you're like me, if you've watched science fiction or even looked up at the stars at night, you've wondered what it's like to go to space, and you remain envious of the people that can afford whatever those tickets are on the Blue Origin flights, $4 million, whatever they happen to be. Well, my next guest doesn't have to imagine what it's like to go to space because he's been there. He is the genuine article, not only an accomplished engineer and scientist who's been a key advisor to NASA on some of the most important missions they've done over the course of the last 30 years, but he flew his first mission into space on board the Space Shuttle mission STS-114, the very first mission back into space after the Columbia disaster. He's also served as a senior advisor for engineering development at NASA's Langley Research Center. I am very, very pleased to welcome the first New York City-born astronaut I've ever had the opportunity to talk to, Charlie Camarda. Charlie, it's great to talk to you.
Hey, Frank, how you doing? Good evening. Thanks for having me.
You know, I mentioned that with Blue Origin, you could kind of buy a ticket to space for an exorbitant amount of money, and you get your astronaut wings. Do you, people that have been scientists or trained members of the military or, I don't know, worked your whole life to get to space, do you guys view the folks that do that as in any way diminishing what it means to be an astronaut?
No, not at all, Frank. You know, I worked for NASA for 45 years. I started out as a research engineer for 22 years before I was selected to be an astronaut. I look at this as the next step in space travel, right? Kind of like aeronautics. In aeronautics, you had the dawn of airplanes, air travel. You had people going around the country barnstorming, right? So those are the suborbital flights. Now you have folks signing up eventually to do orbital flights. And so what it's doing is it's getting the public, we're bringing the price down, making the trip to space more affordable, and the more people that fly in space, the better. It becomes more commercially viable and even safer.
Well, that's great. That actually makes total sense, and your answer really surprised me, so I'm glad I asked it. Hey, when you were at NASA, are there a lot of astronauts from Queens? Actually,
there are a lot of astronauts from New York. You know, Ellen Baker's mother was a borough president in Queens, and she was one of the first astronauts I met when I was selected. You have Mario Runco, you have Bill Shepard, and of course you have the famous astronaut, Mike Massimino, from out there in Franklin Square, you know, Long Island. So we had several astronauts from Queens that I know of.
Wow, that's great to hear. I'm glad New York is well represented in the cosmos. I love hearing that. Charlie, let's be honest here. Why doesn't NASA just come clean with everything they know about astronauts? Why don't they just admit there are astronauts, about aliens? Why don't they just admit there are aliens everywhere?
You know, I on my if you Google search this, you will see results that say that I claim that I saw aliens, and that's totally not true. And I have no firsthand experience. I don't know if any of the astronauts did come clean. I think some may have said they have seen some strange things out there.
But you are going on record as saying all those reports on UFOs and aliens that you've seen, fallacious, not true.
Not true. Not that I know of. I have no firsthand experience, so I cannot corroborate those stories.
You know, I mentioned the fact that you were the part of the first mission to space after the Columbia disaster, and I still remember that like it was yesterday, and it was still so sad what happened with the Columbia. We had a recent, mishap, fortunately nothing like what happened with the Columbia, with the astronauts that are right now still awaiting their return trip on what they thought was going to be a very brief visit, and they're still stuck at the International Space Station, probably not coming back to Earth until February. Take us through what that must be like for them. You're in a much better position to know than most.
Well, they had, what was puzzling to me, Frank, is they had some warning signs before they even launched. They had helium leaks. And so I was retired, of course. I retired in 2019 when this happened. And so I was always concerned that why did NASA decide to launch with known problems on a vehicle? That was a sure indication that something's not right. And so the astronauts, of course, were directed to go ahead and fly. They thought it would be safe. But then they had other thruster issues before they docked with the space station. And those are pretty serious. I mean, they lost 7 thrusters right before docking. Right, and so they spent a while with Boeing and NASA trying to psych out what were the causes of those thruster mishaps, those anomalies, those misfires, and during that time they had to make this critical decision. And what was totally puzzling to me was that the CEO of Boeing basically said they were ready to bring them back on Starliner. And it had to be the administrator of NASA, Bill Nelson, to make the call, say, no, we're not coming back. But it took weeks and weeks of puzzling over this. And they made the right decision. And so now the crew was, they say stranded, but they're on space station. They're safe. And the Crew Dragon capsule came up with 2 members shy on the next flight so that they would save those seats for Bunny and Butch and Sonny to come back on in February.
And obviously we hope things work out, and I just can't imagine being in their position and anticipating seeing your family much sooner than you actually are going to end up being. It's got to be an emotionally, aside from the physical drain of being in space for that long, I would think it's very emotionally taxing.
Yes, it is. I mean, this is not something they planned for, but, these are 2 Navy veterans, military. They spent months and months away from their families. They spent 6 months on space station themselves on other missions. And so it's not something they're unaccustomed to. There's plenty of food, plenty of supplies, plenty of consumables. But the emotional part, absolutely, Frank. You have to deal with it. You have to do a bit flip in your head. And, pilots are very good at compartmentalizing. I'm not a pilot, but the pilots I've flown with, they're very good at compartmentalizing issues when they occur.
I guess it comes with a job. If you're just tuning in, my guest is Charlie Camarda. At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. Charlie, you've been a vocal advocate for reform within NASA. If you could rewrite the rule book for how high-stakes organizations like NASA assess and mitigate risks, what would be the first rule?
I just wrote a book on this, and it took me 18 years, right, to actually put it all down. It's called Mission Out of Control. It'll be on sale tomorrow. You can get it at missionoutofcontrolbook.com, or you go to Amazon. And in that book, it took me a long time. I had 45 years working for NASA. I was the oldest rookie astronaut to fly in space. I worked for NASA longer than any other astronaut. And I worked in several different roles, first as a research engineer, then as an astronaut, then as a senior executive. And after the accident happened, it totally changed my life forever. I was training in Russia when the accident happened, and my specialty was thermal protection systems on these hypersonic vehicles. And when we learned that we lost the vehicle, and I watched those videos, I was extremely sad, and I was extremely angry. It was a foolish mistake. We should not have made that mistake. And so I spent the next 15 years researching not only the technical issues, what's caused this problem, but really what we found out after the accident investigation, that this was caused by the culture. The organizational culture at NASA caused both the Challenger accident and the Columbia accident. And digging into this and reading books by amazing authors and research papers and interviewing these sociologists and behavioral scientists, what I come to understand is that I identified something that was missing that they did not see, because I was a research engineer with the culture. And I call this a loss of what we used to have, which was a research culture. NASA started as NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. And it was 3 small research centers in Hampton, Virginia, Cleveland, Ohio, and out in California at Moffett Field, Ames, Glen, and Langley Research Center. And these people, researchers attacked problems totally different. They were applied researchers looking at developing advanced technology for airplanes, looking far into the future, trying to correlate their analysis with their experiment so the airline manufacturers in the United States could be the best in the world. This was right after World War I. The U.S. did not have any planes flying in World War I. It was only the British, the French, and the Germans. And so we wanted to get back in the race. We wanted to be on top. And these people were researchers, what we call applied research, developing these systems and then transferring that technology into our aerospace industry. And that was lost right after the Apollo program began.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz.
Spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Shopping is hard.
I can never find anything in my size.
I don't even know my size.
I buy my clothes the same place I buy my groceries.
There's a better way. Make it easy with Stitch Fix. Just share your size, style, budget, and done. Your personal stylist sends pieces picked just for you.
That was easy.
Stitch Fix. Online personal styling for everyone. Free shipping and returns. No subscription required. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel or that white chocolate mocha. Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
That is wild. NASA, as we know, is known for its technical expertise, but how do you think emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills play into decision-making at critical moments like during the Columbia recovery mission?
That's a very good question, Frank. And most people, most left-brained engineers don't really get it. And so that's the reason why these accidents reoccur, right? We have these technical people being advised by great sociologists and behavioral scientists like Diane Vaughan, Amy Edmondson, Michael Roberto. They write these papers. They try to guide NASA. But as engineers, some people look at this as a soft science. And they don't really know how to correct the problem. And so these problems reoccur. This is something very similar to what's happening in Boeing right now.
Right.
And so changing a culture is very difficult. And so the second half of my book talks about how do we go about doing this? How do you train the culture in an entire organization? And I want to say that it's not one culture. Each organization is like a confederation of cultures, and so is NASA. Hundreds of cultures, different NASA centers, different Boeing divisions, branches, down to the working group level. So you can have hundreds of different subcultures. And it only takes one of those teams, maybe 10, 15 people, to be dysfunctional, and it causes accidents. The O-ring team, the team that was put together to assess the severity of the impact damage on Columbia, totally dysfunctional.
If people are just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. You're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Charlie Camarda. He's got a new book out. You can check it out. It's called Mission Out of Control, and it's available for order on Amazon, or you can go to missionoutofcontrolbook.com. It's all about an astronaut's odyssey to fix high-risk organizations and prevent tragedy. Charlie, from your experience, what's the most counterintuitive lesson you've learned about managing risk in space exploration that could apply to everyday life or business, whether I'm running a household or a radio station?
Another very good question, Frank. I think the most counterintuitive is the need for failure. It sounds crazy. And Amy Edmondson wrote an amazing endorsement for my books. She's written several books, The Fearless Organization, which talks about psychological safety, which is very important for a healthy culture within an organization. But her other book is called The Right Kind of Wrong. And what people don't understand is that we, as researchers, and a good research culture understands that failure is very important because we learn from failure. But there are good failures and bad failures. It goes from, absolutely exploratory failures, which are necessary, to failures which are, problematic. And so you have to train your researchers, your engineers, how to fail smart, fast, small, cheap, early, and often, and how to do what I call intelligent, fast failure. Right? The failures have to be intelligent. We learn so much from failure. We test the failure in the laboratory so our astronauts and our passengers on our aircraft can fly safe. It's only by testing the failure that we're able to evaluate and correlate our analyses so that we can predict when these failures are going to happen. And engineers have to be trained how to do this, and research engineers, this is how we operate.
Well, I mean, I am not going into engineering anytime soon, but I feel like I got quite an education about the process of an engineer just now in the last minute.
Well, that's the second half of my book, Frank. And so I dive into it, what a research engineer really does. How do you create networks of teams? How do you create the right team to solve these problems?
Let me just go back to space and the future of space travel for a second. There's this growing narrative that the private sector, led by figures like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, are going to dominate space exploration. I know you seemed pretty optimistic about that, but what do you see as the biggest risks of relying too heavily on private companies for something as significant to the planet as going to space?
Oh, I think that's the way of the future. I think that's the way we have to go. And I think they have to develop this partnership with NASA and other government organizations that are devoted to research. We worked very well during the aeronautics phase of air travel, right? And so NASA was basically, or NACA was looking at the far-term research, studying, understanding how do these systems fail, so that we could work hand in hand with these commercial companies to make them safer. And many of these companies, like Boeing, for instance, was an amazing learning organization. They developed what they call technical fellows program, where these people were really doing research within the company, right? And so what happens is when you lose connectivity with the rest of the people in the organization to those really smart researchers, the entire collective intelligence of the organization goes down. When when accidents or when you see an anomaly, you need to put the right team together with the right people to quickly understand that anomaly, determine if it's critical, and then solve that problem. The second half of the book talks about these teams that I put together with friends that I knew. I call them the Friends of Charlie Network, that were these experts in the research centers. And we solved problems in 3 months that NASA couldn't solve in 30 years. And we could have solved these problems, like the impact with the foam, before the accident happened. So the second half of the book talks about, with technology we have today, we can develop these teams, create these teams, link them together on the internet, digitally, and teach them how to work together to rapidly solve these problems. What happened is, you saw the same thing happen at Boeing. They lost connectivity with the technical expertise. And what also happens, and I talk about it in the book, is that you have the programmatic side of the company or the organization pushing to make schedule and budget, and they become dominant and overpower the technical people in the organizations. If you remember, during Columbia, the technical people in the engineering directorate were afraid to raise their hand and say there was a problem. That's a psychologically unsafe environment. That was why the administrator, Mike Griffin, asked me to become the director of engineering at Johnson Space Center. The problem was I was causing so many issues with the program managers, and we were butting heads, that when I stood up and said we shouldn't fly the next mission because it was unsafe, I was reassigned from my job. I was fired.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 3 days. The launch right after Oz, STS-121, I stood up and said we should not launch. It was unsafe. Because remember, a large piece of foam came off the STS-107, the Columbia, and that large piece of foam from the bipod region hit the wing leading edge, either cracked it or made a hole or chipped the coating, and then the entire vehicle burned up during descent. Return to and our flight. They took off those two bipod pieces of foam, but there was still very large pieces of foam on the vehicle, and they did not take off one that we recommended called the protuberance airload ramp, the PAL ramp. They said it would not come off. They said there was a 1 in 10,000 chance it would come off and cause a problem. And when we launched, that 3-foot piece of foam came off the vehicle, went under our wing leading edge. I was in New York this week because my commander, Eileen Collins, just had a new movie come out. It was a premiere called Space Woman. And in that movie, many people in the audience did not understand the things that went wrong during our mission that were critical, and we could have lost our lives.
Wow. Now, it's so interesting, and I think there are probably a lot of lessons for the private sector there as well. Your book talks about toxic work environments. Were there moments when you had to call out decisions or practices in addition to what you just mentioned, where they kind of reassigned you for telling the truth? Were there other moments that put you at odds with the leadership? And how do you navigate those conflicts? And what lessons do you think people listening might be able to learn from what you've been through?
Well, I don't want to give away the whole book.
All right. I guess we lost Charles there. He forgot to pay his phone bill. Either that or the good folks at NASA are afraid of what he might say. But if you want to hear, hopefully, his answer to my question, check out his book. It's called Mission Out of Control. You can get it at missionoutofcontrolbook.com. Its author is Dr. Charles Camarda. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you can give me a call at 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. And who knows, maybe we'll connect with Dr. Camarda once more. This is The Other Side of Midnight, straight ahead.